Hello students, and welcome back to the lore of the Iron Kingdoms with me, Professor Caster. And for all of you that do not know, we go over the lore of the Iron Kingdoms RPG and the lore of the Warmachine game tabletop. Originally brought to you by Privateerpress and now acquired by Steamforge Games, who I believe will do a fantastic job at not only continuing the fantastic work of Privateerpress, but also expanding the Warmachine community way beyond what it originally was prior to that. But back to our continued progression through the Trollbloods Warbeast. Today we are going over the Trollblood Gargantuans, the largest of the trolls that you'll ever see on the field, hopefully. Well, even then, not hopefully, because if you see one of these guys, most likely things have gone askew very greatly. But the guys that we're going over, the three of them are going to be the Mountain King, the original of the Gargantuans, followed by the Glacier King, and then finishing out with the Sea King, and then that will complete all of our Warbeast for everything prior to Mark IV. And then we'll, of course, move on to all the units and solos. Very excited about getting this guy progressed into all of the other trolls that the Trollbloods have to offer. But before we start on that, thank you guys so much for showing up to class today. I know we've been on a little hiatus, but I do appreciate you guys always checking in on our Thursday courses. If you could, please hit that like button and please share, comment, and share this with your friends and fellow gamers. And subscribe, because, you know, we always have to say subscribe on this channel because it will keep all of this fantastic lore and all the shorts coming at you every day, as we seem to do. Also, a big shout out thank you to Steamforge Games for allowing me to continue to read this fantastic lore. And let's begin. Mountain King. To look upon the Mountain King is to see the primal essence of the troll. Hunger, rage, and strength of nature. Seeking to satisfy an incomprehensible appetite, Mountain Kings walk Cain again after millennia of quiescence, shaking the ground with their tread and sundering granite with their roars. Trollkin legend describes Mountain Kings with fearful reverence. The tales speak of time of plenty for the Trollkin throughout Cain. Those Trollkin respected and feared their full-blood troll cousins and kept their distance from the greatest among them, the Mountain Kings, which were already ancient in those nearly forgotten days. The stories of the Mountain Kings were the first trolls to emerge from the stony ground, given life by the harsh joining of Dunya and the Devourer Worm. They kept largely to the remote mountains, far from where the first Trollkins appeared. In time, however, Trollkin populations began to spread and intrude upon the Mountain Kings' territory. The encroaching Trollkins enraged the Mountain Kings beyond all measure. The primal brutes incited one another with howls that echoed across the mountain chains, and even those in remote regions came forth to slaughter. Like emissaries of the worm, the Mountain Kings smashed and devoured all in their path, their blinding hunger overcoming any sense of kinship with the other troll species. The Trollkins saw that in time the great trolls would devour not only their people, but the entirety of the world. An ancient epic describes the gathering of Trollkins, chieftains, warriors, and shamans who sought to subdue the Mountain Kings. They ultimately succeeded, though the means they employed are poorly recorded and even less understood. Somehow the shamans discovered a way to forge chains infused with spiritual energies that could restrain the great beast, and the Trollkins entombed their enormous cousins within the mountain peaks. Many Trollkins died to bring the Mountain Kings to their rage-filled burrows, which were marked with great rune-inscribed stones warning against future disturbances. At first, the Mountain Kings stormed beneath the earth, consuming stones in their hunger and causing the earth to quake. Eventually, they fell into a restless torpor, their turbulent dreams filled with images of hunting and feeding. When they stirred in their sleep, avalanches and mudslides plagued the slopes above them. As ages passed, the Mountain Kings slowly faded into myth. Few Trollkins dreamed they still lay chained underground. Their existences was unproven until Madrak Ironhide and Harlock Doomshaper, pressed in desperation, set out to harness their tremendous might. At no small cost, the two succeeded in nearly unthinkable quest, bringing the first reawakened Mountain King down from the Wormwall Mountains. The Trollkins strive to control these immense and ravenous beasts, which make little distinction between friend and foe. Even the greatest shamans must take care in their presence, using the enchanted chains to still dangle from these creatures' hulking bodies to forestall their hunger between battles. Mountain Kings are truly primeval beings, so closely connected to the essence of creation that their tissue continually spawns small whelps, which they ignore until hunger calls. A Mountain King evokes terror in all who behold it. It lopes forward to fill its fathomless belly, an urge that grows even stronger when the creature is injured. Uneasy Trollkin watching such staggering rampages must wonder at the price paid to ensure the survival of their people. And these things are terrifying and ginormous, even by gargantuan standards. Of course, all gargantuans are enormous, but this guy literally has a mountain on his back growing out of it because he has literally been living in a mountain for millennia. So that actually makes sense, since all Trollkin seem to pull a lot of the environmental stuff they're in for a long time into their forms. But yeah. Just seeing one of these things on the field, it looks like a moving mountain that happens to be attached to a ginormous troll. I do not pity anybody who has to go up against these guys. I wouldn't want to have to go up against these guys, but that's just me. But let's see how much strength they have to knock out as we go over there at Mark 3 to Mark 4 changes, shall we? Alrighty, and as always, we're going to start with his stat line. He's a speed 5. He is a mat of 6. He is a rat of 5. He has a defense 9 because hitting a mountain is never difficult. He has an armor of 19. He has a fury of up to 5. And his threshold is 6. So he very much goes on the killing spree if he has any fury on him, basically. The abilities he has breakthrough, so he can move through other models without losing his ability to attack. He has slam, trample, headbutt, pathfinder, and dual attack. Which makes sense since he is a ginormous warbeast. His abilities have changed a little bit. So they removed assault, but they gave him dual attack, which makes sense. He still has his bulldoze ability. So when this model is base to base with an enemy model during its normal movement, it can push that model up to 2 inches directly away from it. A model can be pushed by bulldoze only once per turn. Bulldoze has no effect when the model makes a trample power attack. Makes sense. Next ability he still has, snacking, because he's still a troll. When this model boxes a living model with a melee attack, it can choose to remove the box model from play, and when it does, it can remove D3 damage points from itself. And then his last one he has is whelp shedding. Whelp shedding, when this model suffers damage from an enemy attack immediately after the attack is resolved, you can place a troll whelp into play within base to base of this model. One of the things they removed from this guy into Mark 4 is something called a kill shot. So what kill shot did in Mark 3, once per activation, when an enemy model is destroyed or removed from play as a result of a melee attack made by this model during its activation, immediately after the attack is resolved, this model can make one basic ranged attack, which it feels like he was throwing the dead model at people, but I'm not entirely sure how that's played out, so that's probably why they removed it, because it sounds like a kind of an odd move, especially whenever we start going over his normal weapons. So maybe it was more of, he killed something and then he roared in excitement. I don't know. But let's go over his weapons. He has Deathly Roar. And what Deathly Roar is a rat of 5, spray 12, which is an increase from its original spray 10 template. So he's got an extra 2 inches. And because of the change in how sprays work, if you have anybody that can increase the range of his melee or his ranged weapon, it actually increases your spray length. So if you have somebody who can give him snipe, you can get him up to a spray 15. And at a rate of fire 1 and a POW 16, that is some heavy damage. And he also has gunfighter, so he can use this in melee, which makes sense since this is a roar. The ability of this weapon also changed. Originally it was deafen. So originally it was a model hit with this weapon suffers -2 defense and cannot give or receive orders. I can see why that was removed, since orders are no longer a thing in Mark 4. It got moved over to critical paralysis. On a critical hit, a living model hit has its defense reduced to 5 and cannot run, charge, or make slam or trample power attacks for 1 round, which is even more detrimental, because if you can reduce their defense to 5, if they survive being hit with a POW 16, which most units aren't going to survive that very well, you can really kind of, ding them up for, or you can really queue them up for, doing a lot of meaty fist attacks, which is our next weapon, meaty fists, or big meaty fists, because you can't get any bigger than a gargantuan's meaty fist. It is a Mat 6, range 2, power 19. And of course it is an open hand weapon, so he can throw and do all the fun stuff with those. So fantastic there. No abilities, it's a meaty fist. It do what meaty fists do. His animus, because everybody has an animus in the Warbeast. He used to have something called Primal. Primal target living faction Warbeast gains +1 strength and mat for 1 round. Its original cost was 2, range 6, and it was only a 1 round duration. It got moved over to Rage, which I feel like Rage is a little bit nicer. Well, and because they couldn't use Primal because strength no longer exists. But Rage that he got is still a cost 2, range 6. He can cast it on himself because he is a friendly faction Warbeast. Target friendly faction Warbeast gains +2 to its damage rolls for 1 round. So if you put this guy with, say other dire trolls, and they're all increasing each other's stuff by, damage, this guy's swinging with a power 21 if he rages himself, or if somebody else gives him a rage. So if you even have anybody, put this guy up to 11, not only is he gargantuan, but he can just walk through most creatures pretty easily, especially if you can get those critical paralysis, which I always suggest always boosting any of his range attacks just so you can fish for crits, because reducing anybody's defense down to 5 and then removing their ability to run, charge, or make slam or trample power attacks is always a very useful thing, especially when you're attacking a Warbeast or Warbeast. So very scary dude. Definitely a little bit more basic than some of the other gargantuans we're going to be going over with the Trollkin, but he does what he needs to do, and he does it very, very well. But let's move on. Glacier King. The awakening of the Mountain Kings chained beneath the warm wall reminded the world of the eternal hunger that once roved the land. The North, too, has its king at the peaks, and there are no less insatiable in their appetites for destruction than their southern cousins. Gifted by the hand of Dunia with the affinity for the elements that envelop them, the Glacier Kings are the embodiment of winter and frozen north. Localized storms laden with ice and snow swirls about their towering forms. Streams and lakes ice over at their passing, and the tree trunks explode in a hail of splinters under the pressure of sap rapidly expanding with the sudden cold. Even after the imprisonment of the Glacier Kings by the northern Creels, tales of the greatest among these trolls circulated far and wide. Trollkin children heard stories of winter mauls, battling giant mountain bears across the shard spires. Around low-burning fires, accounts were whispered of icebringers devouring entire creels. Some shamans attributed the penetrating cold of the north entirely to these primal trolls, saying that avalanches were caused by the beast rolling over in their sleep, and that the harshest storms followed their foul moods. Such stories persisted for generations. Now the Glacier Kings walk the world again, unearthed by Harlock Doomshaper after years of research and many lengthy expeditions, and the harsh realities of the creature's wild temper outstrip any tale. While their insatiable appetites have gnawed at these gargantuan trolls in their cold, dark prisons, the lust for battle also fills their restless dreams. Thousands of years of anger carries them forward now in an avalanche of ice and fang. Massive fists sunder mountainsides and the flattened villages, while the perpetual snowfall surrounding them obscures any forms alongside them. Howling gales whirl around their shoulders and chill with the might of the northern winds. The moisture in the air crackles as it freezes, and the exposed hands and faces of enemies are quickly enveloped in frostbite. Snow and ice blanket the ground at the Glacier King's feet, and enemies who lose their footing nearby are promptly crushed to death or frozen solid before being lofted into the mouth of the jagged yellow teeth. At Doomshaper's bidding, these incarnations of winter descends from the most remote mountain peaks to hurl themselves against the enemies of the Creels. One question remains to the minds of many Trollkin: who will attract the attention of the Glacier Kings once these battles are won? And that is a terrifying aspect. What happens after all the battles are won and the Trollkins are victorious? Are they going to try to force these creatures back to their mountains? Or are these new creatures going to see the Trollkins as the food they were thousands of years ago? I don't know. Time will tell, but these creatures are definitely terrifying, and any walking mountain that can freeze everything to place is also even more terrifying than even the Mountain King, because these guys, they'll literally freeze everything they're going with, unless you have immunity to cold like many of the Northkin do. Most other people would just freeze on the spot and be eaten without even that much of a fight on their end. So, but let's read the Mark 3 to Mark 4 changes, see what we got. And as always, we're going to start with their stat line. He is a speed 5. He is a mat of 6. He is a rat of 5. Defense 9. Armor 19. Fury 5. Threshold 6. So very much like the Mountain King. His abilities: he has breakthrough, slam, trample. He has immunity to ice or frost or whatever you want to call that. He has headbutt. He has pathfinder. He has gladiator. And he has dual attack. Now, gladiator is something that he has that the Mountain King did not. So he gains an additional +2 on damage from power attacks like throws or slams or tramples. He would get an additional, +2, which I think additional +2 gets this guy up to hitting at like a 16 as a base just for tramples. So that makes him even more, terrifying to begin with. And this guy is definitely a scary guy to behold. But let's go over his abilities and see what he still has. He still has bulldoze. So, as per the Mountain King, when this model is a base-to-base with an enemy model during its normal movement, it can push that model up to 2 inches directly away from it. And model can be pushed by bulldoze only once per turn. Bulldoze has no effect when this model makes a trample power attack. Makes sense. He has snacking. When this model boxes a living model with a melee attack, it can choose to remove the box model from play. When it does, it can remove a D3 damage points from itself because it eats people, as per usual. We have some name changes, but let's see how much it changed. In original on Mark 3, it was called Snowfall. While within 3 inches of this model, friendly faction models gain concealment. Now they've upped the ante, so he's a little bit better. It's called Storm's Embrace now at 5 inches. So while within 5 inches of this model, friendly Northkin models gain concealment. So giving your trolls concealment, always very useful, especially for anybody who has things like Prowl, which completely just blank out anything that's near them. So, but giving an additional +2 to any of your guys for defense is always going to be very useful, and having that extended range is very useful there. Let's go over his weapons. He has wind thrower, so I guess he can throw wind, so it's less of a yell, more of a throw, I guess that's what you call it. It is a rat 5, range 12, pow 14, so a little bit less than the yell of the Mountain King, which is all right. He has gunfighter, so he can use this in melee, and it is a frost weapon because, well, he literally is moving storms with himself. The abilities on this weapon are a forced reload 2, so this model can be forced to make additional 2 range attacks with this weapon during its combat action. It can make 1 additional attack for each time it is forced, so that's very useful. Get up to 3 shots with this POW 16 at range 12, which is actually a pretty terrifying weapon for at least ranged weapons. The next ability on this weapon is called Storm Chiller. Enemy models hit can be pushed D3 directly away from this model. On a critical hit, that model also becomes stationary for 1 round unless it has resistance to cold. So this guy can shoot out stationary shots and push his enemies D3 inches back. Well, depending on, if not, he gets a critical hit. So that is also terrifying. But let's move on to his melee attacks. So his melee attacks are 2 big meaty fists as the Mountain King, because these guys don't really use weapons. It is a mat 6, range 2, pow 19. However, in comparison to his warmer cousin, he has freeze on his weapon, on his melee weapon, so a model hit with this weapon becomes stationary for 1 round unless it has resistance to cold. So this would be the exact reason you would like the Glacier King, because his first hit freezes the enemy, and he can just keep wailing on him with that pounding. And if you get him with a dire troll who can increase his strength, whatever he gets into combat with, even if it's kind of dodgy, it just has to be hit once for this guy just to go ham on him and destroy whatever he is crashing into with his frozen fists. So yeah, he is a very dangerous. His animus is frozen ground. It looks like it was still frozen ground back in Mark 3, so nothing really has changed on that one. It is a cost 2, range self, duration just the round, and not offensive. It can be used by both him and, of course, his warlock. When an enemy model without resistance to cold ends its activation within 3 inches of the spellcaster, the enemy model becomes knocked down. So this protects himself or your warlock from a lot of stuff. So unless the enemy model has an immunity to cold or immunity to being knocked down, after its activation ends while within 3 inches of your warlock, or this guy, is automatically knocked down. So this guy could easily just, destroy him, destroy whatever guys run into him his following turn. Because one, he's knocked down, so it's auto hit. And if he hits him, then he becomes stationary and knocked down. And I'm like, yeah, this guy has his abilities make him, I would say, one of the most dangerous of the gargantuan, if not the colossals as well. Just his ability to shut down the enemy and protect his allies with concealment. Yeah, this guy definitely worth every single penny you have to get this guy out to the field, because both stationary and auto knockdown is staggering to the enemy. So, but let's move on. Sea King. Ancient coastal Trollkin creoles performed primeval ceremonies to summon troll kings from the sea to destroy their enemies. The drums and chants of entire villages rolled across the waters and into the depths to reach the ears of the slumbering sea kings and rouse them to wrath. These enormous marine beasts were called from the tides only when there was no alternatives, as the kin could well be devoured alongside their enemies. Creoles forgot their rights over time, and the sea kings vanished into legend. Each established a lair many leagues from Imorn's coastlines, hunting the nearby waters and occasionally waging titanic battles in the deep with other great leviathans. At times they approached the surface to attack passing ships, smashing holes with their great fists and devouring crews that fell screaming into the water. Ship graveyards served as their lairs, and the ocean floors littered with holes cracked open in search of anything worth eating. Tales tell of stretches of ocean that swallow a ship's hull. Experienced sailors avoid these perilous expanses even in the cost of speed and supplies, though there is no shortage of fools seeking faster routes. These poor souls meet unsavory ends as the briny waters erupt and their ships are torn asunder. Sea kings have evolved in different ways from their surface kin, able to endure longer between feasting. One notable adaptation is that they possess not one stomach, but two. First digest whale flesh and doom sailors, while the second serves akin to the spare holding tank to carry them through the lean times. A sea king will glut itself amid swarms of prey, and small creatures swallowed whole remain alive and undigested in the self-contained habitat of its innards. The Sea King has learned to make aggressive use of its food reserves, vomiting up the chitinous swarms in a stream of salt water and partially digested meat. These crabs grab and slice anything in reach, amid panicked effort to escape consumption. After annihilating its foes, the Sea King eats anything left behind. When Harlock Doomshaper awakened the Troll Kings, the Sea Kings also heard his ritual call and felt compelled to wander closer to shore. Creoles who live near the sea have resumed the old ways. Fell callers have raised their voices alongside the pounding of great drums to enlist the Sea Kings again, bringing these horrors from the deep against their enemies. And talk about sea monsters, because this thing is terrifying. And unlike its Mountain King cousin, this guy has a ship on its back. So if you're not really aware and you see a shipwreck out on the coast, it could be one of these things just hanging out in the water waiting for you to get over to it. And eats everything, and two stomachs, one that keeps its food alive and the other for digestion. And that is a terrifying proposition, to get eaten by one of these things but not be killed outright and just have to wait until he feels like, eating you. Terrifying. But let's read over his Mark 3 to Mark 4 changes and see how this giant Trollkin sea monster has changed over the Mark 3 to Mark 4 changes. I can't imagine much, since I think he is relatively new. And I believe in the new Mark 4 they have another one of these guys, so even scarier in that account as well, because that means that these guys are not just myth, they are still out in the open. And as always, let's start with our stat line. He is a speed 5, he is a mat 6, he is a rat 5, defense 9, armor 19, fury 5, threshold 6. His abilities have breakthrough, slam, trample, headbutt, pathfinder. He is also a gladiator, much like the Glacier King. He has dual attack, and he has amphibious, so when he is in water, he disappears and he no longer blocks line of sight. So if you can get him into a very heavily watered area, because he probably needs a relatively big pond, you can see right through him, and then he gains concealment while he's in there. So very, very terrifying for anybody that has to go up against this guy if he's in the water. His special abilities are pretty basic. He has bulldoze like all the rest of the kings. When this model is base to base with an enemy model during its normal movement, it can be pushed. It can push that model up to 2 inches directly away from it. A model can be pushed by bulldoze only once per turn. Bulldoze has no effect when this model makes a trample power attack. And then he also has snacking because he is a troll. When this model boxes a living enemy model with a melee attack, it can choose to remove that model from play. And when it does, he can remove a D3 damage points. So very terrifying on that aspect. Still pretty basic though. Let's read over his fun weapons. We'll start with his Vomit Swarm, as we read about in the archives. Alright, Vomit Swarm, Rat 5, range 10, rate of fire 1, AoE 3, so it's an AoE, power 13, 7. This is he does have the ability to shoot in melee, and this causes corrosion, which makes sense since it's vomit. Also, on top of that, it is poisonous. So, special ability, poison. Gain an additional die on this weapon's damage against living models. So, he automatically gains an additional die, and then you can boost it on top. So, you can give this guy an additional 4 dice of damage instead of the traditional 2 if he's attacking a living model, which is terrifying. And you can hit that model hit plus an additional 3 models within 3 inches. Pretty dang wide splat. Looks like he did lose. Because of the Mark 3 to Mark 4 changes, he lost something called Scuttering Swarm. After determining the point of impact, roll a deviation for 1 additional 3-inch AoE at that point. On a roll of 1 or 2, the AoE deviates in the direction of 1. On a roll of 3 or 4, it deviates in the direction of 2. And on a roll of 5 or 6, it deviates in the direction of 6. A model hit with the additional AoE suffers a POW 7 blast damage roll and corrosion continuous effect. I can understand why that was removed in Mark 4, just because, 1, we no longer use AoEs, and we no longer use scatter templates, because, well, scattering is no longer a thing in Mark 4 to speed up the game dramatically, so that's probably why that has been removed. Let's move on to his next weapons. He is one of the few, well, he's, I think, the only Mountain King who actually uses real weapons, at least in Mark 3. We'll start with his big meaty fist, one of his hands, one big meaty fist. A mat 6, range 2, POW 19, pretty standard for these guys. But he also carries an anchor in the other hand. And the anchor is a mat 6, range 3, because it has a chain on it, and it is a chain weapon, so he ignores shields. And it's a POW 21. See how much more dangerous they are with weapons? And on this one, he has critical knockdown, so on a crit, especially if you're fishing for crits, you can actually have him knock down the enemy and then just go ham. Hammering blow after blow with your... Well, I imagine you're going to be keep hitting him with the anchor, so that actually makes sense. But it does make him a lot more melee beastly as well. Let's go over his animus here. It's called Vortex of the Deep. Same thing it was called. It was called in the last one. Although there has been some variations to this guy. And let's see if we can find those variations. In Mark 3, on a direct hit, push models within 2 inches of the model directly hit, 2 inches directly towards it. In the order you choose, and the spell's AoE is Shallow Water and remains in play for 1 round. Alright, so that doesn't sound too bad. I imagine this is probably setting up for a AoE shot from his Poison Venom Swarm cannon. But let's read what the Mark 4 changes on this guy have done. So it is a Vortex of the Deep, cost 2, range star, interesting, duration round, and non-offensive. So, Vortex of the Deep. Place a 3-inch template anywhere completely within 10 inches of the spellcaster. The template is shallow water terrain and remains in play for 1 round. While in the template, a model gains resistance to fire. Ooh, that's interesting. I'm curious if every shallow water template gives the model resistance to fire. I imagine it's still a good thing to have. Well, yeah. And it says while in the template, so it doesn't say while completely within. So even if you're towing it, I imagine that still is done up. So that's a little different from Vortex of the Deep. So all the new one does is just you're allowed to place a 3-inch template anywhere completely within 10 inches of the spellcaster. Very useful. So if you just want to have some, shallow water terrain for a round, there you go. And then if you need that resistance to fire, like if you're going up against somebody, say like the Protectorate, who use fire a lot, resistance to fire is going to be a very, very useful thing for you outright. So that's interesting. So I guess they just went from a vortex pool to just a standard shallow water template. But I feel like the new Mark IV one actually makes more sense and allows you a little bit more use. Because like being able to push models together in a cluster is cool and all, but with the AoE changes and stuff like that, it's not like as useful as it was back in the day. But yeah, so this guy is a lot more of a pretty beastly melee combatant, and his AoE does pretty significant amount of damage. Now, is it as good as damage as like the Mountain King with his spray doing a 16? Maybe not, but get an additional die on living models if you're going up against a lot of living models like other hordes factions or stuff like that. I could see his use as a lot. And also him having the gladiator ability, any of his power attacks do an additional 2 damage on that, is always going to be pretty dang useful. So I see the Sea King as a very, well, I imagine every model you take is useful in one way or the other. And just this guy being able to give out resist to fire makes him even more useful in the long term. And his anchor actually went up quite a bit from his Mark II counterpoint, so his anchor is still super, super useful for a melee weapon. But that is all we have today. That is all the gargantuans we have for the Trollkin and Mark III. Eventually we'll get over to the Mark IV guys, but that's going to be a little further out. Thank you guys so much for hanging out, and if you could, please like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how you're enjoying these. Let me know if you're excited about Steamforge taking over or anything like that. I'm pretty all right with them. They've been into the in the Warmachine community for a bit, so them taking over and helping expand the Warmachine community with their reach is always going to be a very, very useful in the long run, and helps us keep this lore alive and keep this Steam train going. And if you could, please share this with your friends and fellow gamers on whatever devices you would like to share this on, because that helps keep the Professor Caster channel Steam train rolling as well. And before we head out, thank you again, Steamforge, for letting me continue to read this fantastic lore. And as always, class dismissed.